First up, though, let's talk about assisted dying. Of course, yesterday the assisted dying bill was debated in Parliament, and it seems that the direction of travel is that before too long, it could be the case that if people want help to end their own lives, assisted suicide, if you like, then they will be able to do that. The assisted dying bill assures us it brings in some very serious checks. You need 2 doctors and a judge. You need a 3-week process, and so on and so forth. So we're told it is very safe, but a lot of people still do not believe that we should go down this route. I'm going to put my cards on the table. I mean, I believe people should make their own decisions about their own bodies. Terminally ill adults who are expected to die within 6 months will be allowed to request help and end their lives. The bill, assisted dying bill, will require 2 doctors and a judge to decide in a process lasting 21 days, 3 weeks. There'll also be a new law, it'll incorporated into this law, will be a new law against coercing people to commit suicide. And that, of course, is in case it's for financial gain or other reasons. Yes or no? What do you think? 0344 499 1000. At the moment, of course, it is illegal to assist anyone to end their lives in this country. A lot of people, if they can afford it, they go to Dignitas in Switzerland, to other places that help you commit suicide in countries where it's legal. But it's not legal here now. Let's see what my next guest thinks. He is Dr. Mark Pickering. He's the Chief Executive of the Christian Medical Fellowship and part of the Care Not Killing Alliance. I'm going to go out on a limb here, Mark, and say that you're against this bill. Tell me why.
Well, for various reasons, Kevin. I've worked as a GP in prisons. I've worked as a hospice doctor. I've seen the difference that good palliative care can make to people. And I've had people coming into the hospice from hospital with uncontrolled symptoms who have said, "Doctor, just let me die." A few days later, they get good care. They're not saying that anymore. Actually, when we do get the right care for people towards the end of life, very few of them will persist in asking for assisted suicide. Some do, but far fewer than you would think about from listening to media reports from campaigners.
Well, in terms of what you're saying, you know, you're talking about conditions, you know, which improve and maybe aren't as serious as you might imagine you need a condition to be before you consider assisted suicide. So perhaps that would not qualify. But what about people, you know, who are in, you know, the serious last stages of terrible terminal illnesses, you know, motor neuron, all these terrible afflictions, and for them life is painful, is miserable, and I mean, surely it's worth thinking about allowing assisted suicide for some people.
It's certainly worth thinking about, and I have got a lot of compassion and understanding for people who do think about that. It's a very plausible idea, and many people are very sympathetic to the principle, just like Wes Streeting, the health secretary. It's the practicalities of implementing that safely so that you don't actually open a Pandora's box for other people that is the real problem. I mean, campaigners talk about compassion, choice and dignity, and they're all great words, but none of those stop at terminal illness. You know, people who've got motor neuron disease, life is difficult for them often for a number of years before death comes. It's not painful generally, but it's not pleasant. And so why would you stop at 6 months prognosis? Surely that is cruel to say, well, you can have it within a few months of death, but actually if you're a few years away, you've got to suffer. You know, that's not compassionate.
But that
doesn't
would
give them choice, and surely it's not dignified by their own standards.
But you're sort of coming over to my side of the fence there by saying that maybe people with mutant motor neuron disease or something similarly awful and you know, agonising, that they should be considered for assisted suicide earlier than 6 months.
No, I'm not coming over to your side. I'm just saying that, you know, the campaigners recognise that very few people actually want to pass a much broader law, but to be logically consistent, you would have to do that. And that's why more than 50 MPs have already come to Kim Leadbeater and said, please, you've got to go further. And she, along with Dignity in Dying, her sponsors, have said, no, 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 it's got to be 6 months terminally ill, mentally competent adults, because they recognise that that's the only kind of law that might get through in Parliament. And yet it's a nonsense. It's logically inconsistent, just like we've seen in Canada, Belgium, Holland, a number of other countries. You cannot keep it there. Really, it will almost certainly extend. Even in Oregon, the place where they say it's never changed, they've dropped they've dropped the residency requirements, they've dropped the 2-week cooling off period, so things change almost wherever you go.
So are you not against assisted suicide in principle, or are you against it in all circumstances?
I'm very sympathetic to it, but overall, I don't think that the law should permit it, because if you do permit it for just a few people, it's very difficult not to widen that law further. And it's very difficult for many people who aren't asking for assisted suicide to then resist it or not to feel a burden. Many people in Oregon, around half of the people who do go through with assisted suicide, they say they do it partly because they feel a burden. And I'm less concerned about the Esther Ransons of this world. I know that dying is never pleasant, but she's a lady who's got lots of choice, lots of autonomy, lots of care around her. I'm much more worried about a Bangladeshi lady in East London who's got renal failure, really scared about going into a hospice because she already thinks that doctors might be trying to kill her, especially experiences after the COVID pandemic, when trust in the health service and the government went down. And that's the kind of person that I'm much more concerned about.
So is what you're saying essentially this, that you're not against the principle of people in really bad conditions making this decision, but that the machinery of trying to legislate it is too difficult to make it actually work in the real world? Is that what you're saying?
That's largely it. I think the practicalities are so problematic that I don't think it's going to make the world a better place overall. Now, of course, suicide is not illegal. The Suicide Act decriminalised taking your own life. It's that people want to have the state machinery, as you said, to actually do that for them. But as soon as you bring that particularly into healthcare, then you're opening up a whole raft of Pandora's boxes. And this law doesn't really try to do that. It just talks about doctors can raise the idea of it, but doctors can't actually get out of referring you to another colleague who will do it. It's a bit like saying, well, I don't really want to I don't want to murder my granny, but I can hire a hitman who does. There's not a lot of moral difference if you just say, look, I don't want to be involved in that. This law says actually a doctor still has to refer to a colleague who will do that.
I mean, do you agree with me, Mark, that, I mean, my overriding feeling is, and I understand what you're saying, the imposing a legal process on all this comes with a lot of difficulties and a lot of problems. But overarchingly, do you agree with me that, sentient adults should be able to make the decision to end their own lives?
I think autonomy has its limits. We can't drive at whatever speed we want. We can't do lots of things because it impacts on other people. And I think in a society where we care for each other, then there are times when we say, well, I'd like to do that myself, but actually I accept that the exercise of my autonomy would probably impact on other people. Maybe not straight away. If I drive at 100 miles an hour to get to the airport, I may not crash. But if we just say it's okay, everyone can do that so that they can get where they need to, you're going to get a lot more crashes. And I think that's the problem here. Yeah, it's not going to impact negatively on every person. And yet, if we change our society in that way, I think overall it's going to make a less caring society.
Interesting. My final point to you, Mark, is do you also, or do you agree with me, that in many ways this argument or this debate is kind of confected? It's as if, anybody who thinks, I'm in such agony, I'm in such pain, my condition is so terrible, I want to end my life, but oh my God, I can't because I have to go to the state and I have to ask 2 doctors and a judge, to decide whether or not I'm allowed to do this. I mean, in the real world, people will do it anyway, won't they?
Well, some will. And I think, there are, ways and means to do that, and some are more gruesome than others and more comfortable than others. I think what's been fascinating is this idea of the sarcopod,
Yeah.
the nitrogen gas chamber that Philip Nitschke has done, and that is causing outcry because it's not, it's not a nice thing to think about, your own personalized gas chamber. But actually, that's the ultimate autonomy machine, because if you want to do it yourself, you buy one of those, you plug it in, you press the button, off you go. There are ways to do that, but actually that's pretty uncomfortable. So people do want the sanitization of having a doctor and a healthcare system involved in it. I do understand that, and yet I think it's going to be a bad thing for the health service. And certainly if we start getting palliative care physicians involved in that, that's really going to turn things on the head. It's one reason why palliative care physicians are one of the most opposed groups, because they work with dying people all the time. They know about the pressures, they know about the difficulties.
It's interesting, yeah, those suicide pods, you can't buy them on hire purchase, I gather, and I wish they'd stop photographing them in beautiful forests. It's a really weird spectacle, that. Mark, fascinating to talk to you. Come on again, let's talk about this some more.